Hi everyone! Today we are going to introduce one of the most important branches of biology, genetics. We will introduce some concepts and then we will go on to explaining genetics using certain diseases and conditions as examples. First of all, let's introduce those concepts that are the basis of genetics. As we discussed in a previous video, a gene is a sequence of base pairs present in the DNA. This sequence of base pairs codes for a specific protein to be synthesized, which then gives rise to a trait. So if you think about someone who has blue eyes, this means that the gene that codes for the eye color produces a protein that creates the blue color in their eyes. This is a simplified version of the genetics involved in eye color. Alleles are the different options that exist for a certain gene. So for eye color, the alleles would be blue, green, brown, black, etc. Genotype is the set of genes of a specific organism. So the genotype of someone contains multiple genes, with one of them being the eye color gene, which has different alleles such as blue eyes, green eyes, etc. The phenotype is the set of observable traits. Basically, what is in your genes does not automatically translate into an obvious trait. You will see why in a bit. So all the traits that you can observe in someone, their eye color, hair color, height, etc., are part of the phenotype of that person. As you know, you are given genetic information from your mother and from your father. For each gene that you have two alleles present for that gene. One allele that was passed on from your mother and the other allele was passed on from your father. But you know that you don't have two phenotypes for each trait. So if your dad passes on a brown eye allele and your mum a blue eye allele, that does not mean that you get one brown eye and one blue eye. So how does that work? It works based on dominance. So certain alleles are dominant and others are recessive. Now imagine those two alleles you get for a certain gene, one from the mother and one from the father. If those alleles are actually the same, then that person is going to be homozygous for that trait. Homo means the same in Greek. So that's an easy trick to remember that. On the other hand, if those two alleles are different, then that person would be considered heterozygous for that trait. Let's have a look at an example. Let's use eye color again. We will use the letter B to represent the alleles. So capital B will be the dominant allele for brown eyes, and small b will be the recessive allele for blue eyes. As you can see on the picture, in this example, let's imagine the mother is heterozygous for the eye color gene. She has one brown allele and a blue allele, but because brown is dominant over blue, her phenotype is brown. The dad, on the other hand, has blue eyes because he has the two recessive alleles for blue eyes. If they decide to have offspring, there are 4 possibilities in terms of eye color, which you can see from the table. 50% of the offspring will be heterozygous and will have brown eyes, and 50% will be homozygous and will have blue eyes. Let's jump to some specific examples of how genetics is inherited by looking at some illnesses and health conditions. Let's start with cystic fibrosis. This disease follows the basic pattern of inheritance we just looked at for eye color. The normal allele codes for the CFTR protein, and the mutated allele does not code for that protein. When a person inherits the mutated allele from both parents, then they don't produce the CFTR protein, which gives rise to the disease called cystic fibrosis. The mutated allele is recessive, so a heterozygous person for this trait will still be healthy, as they will still possess a normal allele that codes for the CFTR protein. This mode of inheritance is called monohybrid inheritance. Now I know I've said that alleles are either dominant or recessive, but that is not always the case. Certain alleles can be codominant, so both of them are expressed as a phenotype. The way we inherit our blood group is an example of this. As you know, there are 4 blood groups: O, A, B, and AB. So right away you can tell that the AB group is a result of codominant inheritance. The way blood groups are inherited is exactly the same as we explained before, with A and B being dominant alleles and O being recessive. You need to have 2 alleles for every gene. So if you're blood group O, you know your genotype is OO, as it is recessive. If you are A, you can either be AA, if both your parents passed on an A allele, or you can be AO, as A is dominant, so that is the phenotype that you present. The same happens for B. But with AB, it is a little different. Because these alleles are both dominant, when you get A from one parent and B from the other parent, you simply have both of them as your phenotype, and therefore you present the blood group AB, which is the rarest one, by the way. This is called a codominant inheritance. Speaking of blood groups, you may have heard of being either a negative or positive blood group, like O negative. This is the rhesus factor, which is a protein that lives on the surface of our red blood cells, if you are rhesus positive, that is. If you are rhesus negative, then you don't possess this protein. The rhesus positive allele is dominant, and the rhesus negative allele is recessive. The inheritance of the rhesus factor is independent of the ABO blood groups, so it follows a standard monohybrid inheritance. If you are rhesus negative, then that means you have 2 recessive alleles. And if you are rhesus positive, then you can either have 2 rhesus positive alleles, or 1 rhesus positive and 1 rhesus negative. However, this can become a problem during pregnancy. If the mother is rhesus negative and the baby is rhesus positive, that means that the mother's immune system can start attacking the baby's cells. This happens because if the mother has been in contact with a rhesus positive blood at some point in her life, and then it happens again during her pregnancy, that means that her body will produce antibodies for the rhesus protein, and therefore the antibodies will start attacking the baby's red blood cells, which can be very bad, as you can imagine. Gender is determined through genetics as well. Women have 2 X chromosomes, and men have 1 X and 1 Y. So you can only inherit an X from your mother, and from your father you can either inherit an X or a Y, which will then determine your gender. So your dad is the one responsible for it. However, there are several genetic conditions linked to our sex chromosomes. One of them is called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. This is a result of a mutation that occurs in a gene present in the X chromosome, which causes muscle weakness and other problems. Because it is only present in the X chromosome, it is more common in men, as they only have 1 X chromosome, so they can't escape it if they inherit this allele. Women, however, as they have 2 X chromosomes, can simply be heterozygous and therefore healthy, but they are called carriers as they carry the mutated allele, but still present a normal phenotype. In fact, any condition which is recessive and present in the X chromosome makes men more prone to it, and women less prone to it. But not all mutations are bad, remember. Mutations are the main source of genetic variability, and we only exist because our ancestors suffered numerous mutations that led us to where we are now. So mutations create new alleles, either good or bad. These mutations don't always occur the same way. If you think about your DNA and all those base pairs which are in a specific order, giving rise to the phenotypes you present, a mutation can occur in several ways, when that DNA is being translated into a protein or when it is replicating. It can be a point mutation, which means only one base pair is affected. This base can either be removed altogether, called a deletion. It can be replaced by another base, called a substitution, or another base that wasn't there to begin with can be added to the DNA strand, called an insertion. Mutations, along with the events that occur during meiosis, are what introduces genetic variability in our populations. However, genes are not the be-all and end-all when it comes to our characteristics. Our environment is massively important and influential on our personalities and traits. Thank you for listening today, and thank you to our patrons for supporting us and for believing in us. As always, we will continue to create exclusive content for our patron. I hope to see you again next week, where we will talk about protein synthesis. Have a great week.